All right, so you're good to go. Just, talk about your topic.
Okay, so basically, I've been having a discussion online with the YouTuber named Paulogia. You're not familiar with him?
No.
Okay, so he's your basic atheist, and he does videos about morality and things like that. So I'm actually wasn't familiar with him before this past week or so, but he's put out a moral challenge to Christians. And since you're um, pretty up to date on ethics and things like that, I thought,
Don't
I would.
overstate it. I know a little bit, but I don't. When people say things like that, I'm like, red flag. I don't know that much, but sorry, go
Well,
ahead.
sure. I mean, if you've seen my channel at all, I've had discussions with Ben Arbor and I'm having some other philosophers come on. So like, I get where you're coming from. Like, it's not what you do for a living, but you're pretty
Well,
proficient in it.
ironically, it is what I do for a living, but I just
Well, yeah, I
don't
guess
claim to
so.
have some like high level knowledge or something. So I just draw attention to that when people say anything that makes it
Okay.
sound like that. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. So, I like the way that you kind of break down things step by step, and you like to look at it. And the other thing is, I wanted to have a conversation with you about this because I've seen poke holes into multiple non-believing worldviews, and so I know you're not afraid to like go against the grain as far as the you'll step up to an atheist or agnostic and say, no, wait a second, you're wrong because of this. And so I think some people try to toe the party line, and so I thought maybe I'd lay this out for you, and you could tell me where I'm wrong, or either if he's actually being short-sighted like I think he is.
I will do my best.
Okay, so to lay this out, um, he gives a moral challenge to Christians in which he says he gives two, basically like a pie, like a circle. He gives two circles, and one he says, okay, in this side of the graph there's biblical morality, okay, and then there's another circle, and it's maximizing well-being,
Sorry,
and
is
he
this
says
is this a Venn diagram? Like, are they overlapping circles?
um, he not at first, but he does kind of put them together and say, hey, there is overlapping areas,
Okay, you don't have to
but
go there. I just wanted to see if I'm understanding. So there's two separate circles. One has biblical
yes.
morality. One has what, utilitarianism or something?
No, it's maximizing well-being, which I think kind of equates to utilitarianism in a way,
Depends what
because
well-being means. Like if
it,
well-being means preferences or
so
hedonic pleasure or something, then it sounds like utilitarianism for sure.
so that's the problem. So I've made a video response, and in my response, I actually say, well, he doesn't actually define the term well-being. I said, but we can be charitable. In the video, I said, well, we can be charitable. Say that it means something like um, not suffering or something to something general to that effect. Okay, so he
Hmm.
doesn't actually define well-being, but it's for our purposes. I don't know if we actually need to have that. Um, so let me just give you a quick clip of how he represents the blue circle, which is well-being.
Sure.
I'm gonna try and pull it up here real quick, and let me know if
Okay.
you can hear it. Let's see.
Well, you could actually send it to me, and then I'll have the clip playing on the video.
Okay. So let's
So
see.
if you post it in general, I'll see it.
It's
Or
posted on my YouTube channel. Should I?
I
But
can
it's
I can go
actually
over there and find it as long as you know the timestamp. One second.
yes.
Let's see.
So
Converse
go ahead.
contender. See if I can find it
purely
here.
according to
Yeah,
this
there's your
criteria.
channel. And then what's moral challenge for Christians
Okay,
response?
so
I'm assuming. And do you want to just give me the timestamp in there?
So it looks like. Let's see. Let me make sure.
Maximizing
Sure.
Because I want to get it in his own words. Basically.
Okay, so as you
All right. So it looks like
get out in his own terms.
at four. Let's see. It's at four. At 410, he lays out what he means
410.
in the blue category.
Okay, now I'm just gonna play this. You won't hear it, but I'm just gonna watch it and then I'll start talking again once it's done. But it'll show up on the recording.
Okay.
So there's that.
Okay.
Alrighty. Let's do this then. One second. Need to turn on that
And it's just a
audio.
short clip and then I come back on.
Sure. Okay, let me just play this.
For the sake of discussion, imagine that this blue circle represents a moral system that wants to maximize well-being over the longest term and over the greatest scope of beings, and so will evaluate actions purely according to this criteria.
Okay, so although he doesn't actually define...
Okay, so I saw the little part with the circles. Okay, so I saw the little part with the circles.
Okay, so he said something like the blue section is a moral system that aims to maximize well-being over the longest period of time over the greatest number of beings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, and his challenge is the left circle, the yellow circle, is biblical morality, and the right one would be maximize well-being, and then this criteria he gives, he actually says in another part, well, let me just go through this first. He says maximize well-being for the greatest number of beings over the longest period of time. Okay. Now, his argument, or his challenge is, what is moral? What is something that's moral in the biblical morality category that wouldn't be considered maximizing well-being, that most non-believers would still consider moral, even though it's not considered maximizing well-being? Okay, do you understand so far?
Yeah, I can probably already think of an example. Like, how about, murdering someone when it just fails to maximize utility by about 1 pinprick?
It's so funny that you said that, because I want to give you his responses to my example. I said in my video, I can think of a lot of them, but one I wanted to give that I thought was a trivially easy one to understand was the book of John, chapter 15, verse 13. It says, there's no greater love than one that gives his life for his friend. So basically, you're sacrificing your life for someone else, right? And I say, not for a group of, let's take an instance or an example. One person is going to die because a grenade is thrown on the ground. And another person, she jumps on the grenade to save her friend. She dies and her friend lives. Now, all she has done is give her life for her friend's life. It's a one-for-one direct trade. And matter of fact, her friend might have also got some shrapnel or something and suffered anyway, but she saved his life. And here's the thing is, I believe that is a moral action, and most non-believers would think, yeah, that's moral for her to give her life for her friend. And but I also think that it doesn't increase well-being, because even if you were to stretch that ethic over a long period of time, trading one for one life it doesn't maximize well-being. At most, you might say it's amoral.
Yeah.
But there's no way for it to maximize well-being. Do you get where I'm coming from?
Well, if you say that the situation is such that whichever of them lives, well-being is identical, then it's just kind of definitional in your example that it doesn't matter who dies, that has no impact on well-being. So
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, my basic take here is this is going to be one of those things that's a little hard to argue, because what did he say? Something that most unbelievers will agree is
moral.
Is moral. Yeah. So,
but I think
let me just make a point.
Go ahead. So,
yeah. I was just gonna say that I think that a debate like that is hard, because it's one of those conversations where you have to go like, what do most people believe? We probably don't. It's gonna be hard to find data on some specific wrongdoing that there might be an example of in the Bible and in like, I don't know, that we have like data and stuff on. So that just could turn into a bit of a challenging thing. But to really hardcore prove that empirically. But my basic intuition is, I wouldn't just call this intuition, but my basic thinking about this topic is, I think that utilitarianism doesn't capture what everyone values. I think it's very obvious that there's tons of people who have values that aren't just purely utilitarian. Biblical morality, as far as I understand it, I haven't, by any means read a lot about it, so if I'm wrong about this, fine, but I understand that a lot of it is deontological. Like, it's just like rules and stuff. Like, you don't murder people. That's like biblical morality. Well, sorry, just let me just
go ahead
continue
sorry.
This. So a lot of people have some degree of care for deontology. I'm a threshold deontologist, so I have some concern for deontology. And it just seems like you can find like, the way I thought of the counter example was, I just thought like, Well, what's an example of something that's deontological in the Bible, and that most people would like probably agree with when there's not really like any noticeable effect on utility? And just an easy example is like killing someone, right? Like killing someone to maximize well-being. If there's two possible worlds, one in which you kill them and one in which you don't, and the one in which you kill them has more well-being, but the amount more well-being it has is equivalent to like a sip on a can of Coke,
Sure.
I think most people do think that that's immoral. Or I think your example's fine too, just saving someone when it has no impact on utility. In fact, I don't want to make a claim about most people, but there's certainly a lot of people who would find that moral. So, yeah. Now, what were you going to say?
Sure, and I'm sorry if I interrupt you.
No, that's fine.
Basically, sometimes I want to preempt something. So I don't think your first point that it depends on whether most people think that it's moral or not. He actually didn't disagree with that, and here's why. Because he said, what's something in like a principle of morality from the Bible that most people would intuitively understand as being moral. So I don't think he would go. So he didn't say, well, people don't think that that giving yourself, like sacrificing your life for another person, is not moral. I think he didn't even give a concern to that. But I like to read you his responses because I actually think that he is giving. I just think that he's super short-sighted.
Okay.
And maybe you can take his responses and actually deal with them then.
Sure, I'd be curious to hear them, but I just want to be clear about what I said. I thought his challenge was to find something that's in the non-overlap region, that's in the biblical morality circle, and that most atheists would find ethical.
So it's not in the overlap because he wants
not in the overlap. Something that's just biblical.
Okay, Yep.
And
you're
that
right.
most atheists would find ethical.
Yes.
Right. So I'm just all you're doing. I just want to make sure I'm understanding. Right. So you're just picking an example. You're saying, okay, in the Bible, it's considered good to what did you say? Does like sacrifice your life to save someone? Let's just grant that and just say that's accurate theology or whatever. Now, if that's the case, then we can
because that's what Christ did, right?
Well, that presumably you could argue that would maximize well-being.
Okay.
What he
Well,
did
go
there.
ahead.
But yeah, sure. So let's just say self-sacrifice is moral according to the Bible. Let's just grant that. Now, if that's the case, it does seem like you can just make a counterexample, and you can say, look, here's a case. We don't put it in the well-being circle or the overlap region because it doesn't have an effect one way or the other on well-being. Whether they're killed or not, there's going to be the same amount of well-being. I think most people still think that the virtuous thing to do is to give up your life to save the other person. So I think that's a pretty good counterexample. I think that seems fine.
Definitely. But what you just said...
I might have said something too strong. I don't know if it's most, but I think a lot of people... I mean, there's a lot of people who are going to agree that's a moral thing to do. So.
Well, he didn't disagree with that part, so we're...
his challenge, I think, was something most atheists would find moral. I don't know. I don't want to make that claim. I don't know the data.
No, I understand.
But it seems like, if not most, I would feel comfortable saying a lot.
Yes, and since he did, so he said that not that they find it, but that they would intuitively know that it, or it would seem moral to them.
Yeah, I'd still make the same claim. I think it seems intuitively moral to most people.
You're trying to not make I understand. You're trying to be conservative and not make an overstep.
And I'm just trying to make sure that I'm addressing what he says. I think his wording was something that's from the Bible side, not the overlap region, not the well-being region, that most atheists would find ethical. I think that was the challenge. So I just didn't want to say for sure I've met it there, because maybe this is a thing that a lot of atheists would find moral, but maybe it's not most. I can't prove it's over 50%, but I definitely know a lot of people will find that moral. I'm comfortable going that far for sure.
Sure. Well, I understand, and so I don't think he didn't disagree with that. So let's move to what his actual response is, because something that you just said, where you just take an example and you go, well, here's an example of it where it doesn't increase well-being. That's exactly what I did, but his response.
Well, I was just restating your example just to make sure.
Oh, I know.
So I didn't do anything original there, but yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I agree, but what you did was you tacitly gave approval that makes sense to you. So let me give you his responses and my responses, and I just want to go through these so that you can have the full picture, and then I just want your take on it to make sure I'm not missing something, okay?
Sure.
So he responds to my video response saying, Your response to the challenge is that self-sacrificial giving does not increase well-being of society. That doesn't track. And I said I've already
No.
answered.
Sorry,
Yeah.
the garbage. Okay, so the first thing we want to do to avoid any misrepresentation is probably to syllogize, right? So
Sure.
we want to actually just formalize the argument. Now, I'll just explain the obvious problem I saw there, which I'm sure you saw too. He's taking something that's not entailed by your situation, which is that it
Right.
maximizes well-being, and adding it in. You can just correct the hypothetical and say this is an instance of self-sacrifice that doesn't maximize well-being, as if that wasn't fucking obvious from the fact that you're answering his question.
That's exactly what I did in my response.
Yeah. So
So,
it might
go
be
ahead.
it might be useful to syllogize that. So that might just take a second, but then you can leave with
Mm-hmm.
it formalized, which at least will be useful. So I think we can probably just set up a modus ponens.
Mm-hmm.
So just give me a minute to think there. So
Yeah, go ahead. I'm just gonna read you my response to that, and then you can set it up while
Okay.
I'm doing that.
Well, that'll be me doing two things at once. I just want to go step by step.
Oh, okay.
So
Oh, yeah, go
we'll
ahead,
just
go
we'll
ahead,
just
go
be a
ahead.
bit methodical. This will probably just take me a minute. So
Yeah, sure.
we're gonna say what's the thing we're looking for. Our conclusion is that there's an action from the I guess we'll say it's weird he didn't use the word biblical, but we'll say Bible morality circle, because that's what he called it. There's an action
Yeah.
from the Bible morality circle that most atheists would, I don't know if we want to say most. We'll just say most for now, would find ethical. Okay, so that's the conclusion. Now, if that's the conclusion, we're also going to want it as the second step in the modus ponens.
The premise, right?
Yeah. So we're going to say if something, then that. Okay, and let's just write the form here. P implies Q. This is going to end up being P. And this down
And then we'll
here
say something like
end up
if
being
it is
Q.
if it is the case that this example doesn't maximize well-being, then the conclusion, right?
Yeah, if it's the case that if let's say we can go if there exists an instance of self-sacrifice that doesn't maximize well-being, but that is nonetheless seen as ethical by oh wait, this is getting a bit tautological. 1 second. If okay, wait. So if I almost wrote a tautology there. If sacrificing oneself to save
one
another
other
without maximizing well-being. Now let me just think about the framing. We're almost good. I've got this like about 60%.
Well, I
right
wouldn't
now.
put that without maximizing well-being in a premise, because that's it seems like it's begging the question.
No, we're gonna
So-
set it up so it won't beg the question. I just
Okay.
need enough time to get through this. So let me just
Yeah,
you
go
have to be
ahead,
a
I
bit
understand.
patient with me, and then I'll just
Yeah,
get this
sure.
done, and it'll be useful
No
when we have it
problem.
done. Okay, I think I've got it. I'm just reading it over now.
Yeah, sure. Take your time, man. I'm not in a hurry or anything like that.
Okay. Also, I'm gonna send you a friend request. And then I can maybe just DM this to you. Oh, I have you as a friend, so I can just DM this to you, or I could post it in general. Are you looking at general right now?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, I'll post it in general. I'm gonna.
Is there any way for me to pin that, like, so it stays in front of me?
I'm gonna message it to you also.
Okay, go ahead.
So, but this will open my DMs on stream. We don't have anything private in the DM, do we?
You talking about it for Twitter or what?
No, I just mean I'm recording my screen right now. So if I open our DMs, it'll show up on the recording. We don't have anything in there that's there's nothing personal in there, is there?
You talking about on Discord?
Yeah, Discord.
No,
Have we
no,
even talked
no.
in there? Okay.
No,
all
no,
right,
no. I don't
opening
think
it.
so.
Okay, nice. We don't even have a conversation here. Good. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
All right. So it's just a habit. I've done that before, and it's ruined recordings. Okay,
Okay,
so
I got you.
here's I think this works. So if sacrificing oneself to save another without maximizing well-being is seen as ethical by most atheists, then there's an action from the Bible morality circle that most atheists would find ethical. Premise 2 is just it is the case, right? It's just saying sacrificing oneself to save another without maximizing well-being is seen as ethical by most atheists. Conclusion: therefore, there's an action from the Bible morality circle that most atheists would find ethical. Would you say that's an accurate representation of your argument?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm obviously we could put it in more general terms, but for a academic, that would probably be the way I would put it, just to make sure that we covering all our bases. So that is a good way to put it. And let me just ask you this real quick, because
Sure.
anybody who follows me or knows me, my favorite term is facile, and I think that it's most underused term there is. Are you familiar with that term?
Facile?
Yes.
I'm aware of the term facile. Sorry, how does that apply to this?
Okay. So here's why I want to bring that up. I bring it up a lot because what it actually is when you give a neat argument of somebody else's position without accounting for the complexities of that.
Sorry, what argument?
A neat
Neat?
argument.
Like neat and
Yeah.
tidy? Okay. Sorry, it's your
Yes.
accent. Yeah,
So
sorry, go ahead.
it's almost it's almost
fine.
like giving a caricature without accounting for all the complexities. So his response, where he says, your response to the challenge is that self-sacrificially giving does not increase well-being of society. That doesn't track. Obviously, that's not what I'm saying, that self-sacrifice, it doesn't increase well-being.
Can I give you something useful here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so the best way to push back on that, so obviously we all understand the move that's being made there. The move that's being made is you've given a counterexample that shows a case from the Bible morality circle that most atheists would find ethical, right? Now what he's doing is he's looking at your counterexample and he's saying, well, actually, that falls in the overlap region. Now the problem is obviously that he is adding a factor to your example, which is that it maximizes utility, that's not entailed by your example. So the reply that you can give is you can ask him to derive a contradiction from the propositions A is sacrificing himself to save B, and A's sacrifice doesn't maximize well-being. And if he can't, then there's no reason for him to say that it has to fall in that section of the circle. So you can be very technical about that, and he won't have a way out of that.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, and I agree with you. So
how can
I guess,
just to be clear, what impossibility presumably means, at least this is what we mean by logical impossibility, is that it entails a contradiction, right? Now, he's not going to be able to show that your instance, right, without his adjustment, that is an instance of self-sacrifice that doesn't maximize well-being, entails a contradiction. I want to make sure this is a really important point, because that is like probably the strongest reply you can give to that. If he can't show that entails a contradiction, then there's no reason for him to say that your example necessarily has to maximize well-being.
Yeah, so I agree, and here he would have to show a contradiction. But here's the thing: is I actually laid out in the video a couple of like I wanted to preempt some responses that I might get. So I said something like, listen, when we're talking about normative ethics, we talk about them in terms of instances or examples of ethics. Now, one thing I thought he might do is take this example and say, yeah, but if you sacrifice yourself for many people over time, it would be a net gain. So I said in the video, this would not be a good example. So it would probably help you if I just went ahead and read you his responses, and then you understand where he's coming from. And
I understand. So I understand the first move was to say that it would maximize well-being. That's adding something that's not entailed by your hypothetical, so you can just adjust it out, or ask him if he wants to insist it has to be out to show that it entails a contradiction, to say that there's an instance of self-sacrifice that doesn't maximize, that doesn't maximize utility. Now the other one that I'm hearing is that if that behavior were mapped out over time, it would maximize utility. But you can still reply with the same challenge, right? You can just say, okay, I want you to show me that a logical contradiction is entailed by saying that we have multiple instances of self-sacrifice over a period of millions of years, and it still doesn't maximize utility, right? He could say it's highly likely to maximize utility or something like this, right? But he can't show that it's logically necessary, so you can still give a counterexample. So
Well,
you can reply in the
so
same way to the
so that's
point
what
of it. Yeah.
actually, that wasn't what he said. That was what I said in the video to like preempt that response to
Oh,
say
okay.
that still wouldn't work. So what I did actually say to him when he says, "You're saying that self-sacrificially giving does not increase well-being," which is not what I said. I said, I've already answered that response. You could say that self-sacrifice increases well-being in some instances, but one person sacrificing their self for another does not increase well-being, or in your terms maximize well-being. If you would have just put well-being in the blue circle instead of, you could have made that argument, but because you put the term maximize in that argument, it still works.
I didn't
Also,
track that. I'm sorry. That didn't
okay.
make sense to me.
So what I told him was, I said, listen, I'm not saying self-sacrificial, actions can't increase well-being in some
Obviously.
instances. Yes,
maybe
in some
maybe
instances.
even most.
Like if I died, if I
You
jumped
can
on a
grant that
grenade,
it's 99% of instances and it doesn't
Sure.
affect your case. He has to show it's logically impossible for it to affect your case.
right.
Yeah.
So I said, because you put maximize well-being in that, circle, I said, if you were to have just put the term well-being in there and not put maximize, then you could have put then he could have said something like, well, sacrificing your life for another one could actually be an instance of well-being, promoting well-being, but not maximizing it, if that makes sense. But that's not actually
if I don't know, it depends how you mean promote. But I'm not even sure if that makes sense. But I don't even know if that's that important, because if he uses different words, then maybe the counterexample has to change. Let's just deal with his words as they are.
Yes. So that's not that important. But what I said was, also, I would just say that it doesn't make you look bad to accept a direct answer to your challenge as legitimate, because some people won't accept it because they think it makes them look bad to get an answer to their challenge. So here's what his response was. He said that you can think of side cases where self-sacrifices might not be net positive on some metric or another.
Wait, that's him conceding to you.
That's him conceding. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
that's why I wanted to get to this. Is he concedes because, that you can think of side cases where the self-sacrifice might not be positive on some metric or another, doesn't mean that a spirit of self-sacrifice isn't generally beneficial for well-being.
No. But the thing is, that's a different challenge. If he said an action that, if accepted as a rule, would tend to maximize well-being, if he framed his whole thing differently, then you'd have to find a more precise counter. Actually, I should think maybe your same counterexample works, but the point is, he's adjusting his wording. His challenge is met by your counterexample. That's just kind of like, it's sort of like end of story. The only way he can push back on that is pushing back on P1, right? P2.
P2,
if you look at P1 is just straightforward. I mean, there's just if he grants that there's an instance like that, then
it follows.
Yeah, right. So the only thing he could argue against is that most atheists would find it ethical. And if he wanted to that's probably the best path. He can just be he can just kind of play dumb if he wants and just be I'm just not convinced that everyone thinks that. I mean, show me the evidence, right? And you're not going to have exact evidence. Maybe there's studies on self-sacrifice, but the point is that would send you on an empirical goose chase, though. He could do that if he wanted to.
Sure, but that's not
if
his stance.
If he grants that particular action would be seen as good by most atheists, he's basically fucked. That's just a concession if he grants that action would be seen as good by most atheists.
Right, and I agree with that. The thing is, he doesn't even challenge premise 2. He goes on to say that just because you can come up with one instance doesn't mean that a spirit of self-sacrifice isn't generally beneficial for well-being. And then he says that one might lie to protect another doesn't mean the principle of honesty isn't generally beneficial. You'd have to argue that self-sacrifice is generally not a well-being factor.
I don't see the word general in the circles, though, do you?
That's exactly my point.
I agree with you.
Is because, so he says, including the increased morale, pride, honor of the group, is that where you want to go? And then I said, my example wasn't self-sacrifice in general. It was a specific example that works on biblical morality,
yes,
but not on maximizing well-being systems. So let's be honest here. And I said, you might want to look up the term facile before you reply. And the reason why I like that term is because it's giving what you think. It's almost like a straw man, but it's basically giving a neat argument without accounting for the complexities or the entailments of the issue. So his response was, well-being isn't a single metric of most number of people alive. Otherwise, I'd have used most number of people alive as the label. If that's the depth and quality of your argument, you might want to put the word facile on a shirt and wear it around.
No. Okay, so I also want to point out, like, overall, I don't even agree with biblical morality. Just in case you show this to me in the future. So
you're not a Christian.
No, I don't but I just think that this particular challenge, as framed, is probably not that hard to answer. I mean, unless we're gonna go down the, like, I'm really skeptical about, like, most people find, like, throwing yourself in a grenade to save someone being ethical. Like, it seems pretty obvious to me. Most people think that's ethical, but so I think that even though I'm not I'm not in agreement with Christian morality, really, like, I mean, I just don't think
that's not a controversial.
And let me just reply to the last thing that he did.
Sure, go ahead.
So what was that last one? Let me just.
He said, "Well-being isn't a single metric
So
of most number of people."
This is why some people hate the term well-being, right? So, I'm fine with well-being as long as we have a general idea what we're talking about. So, there's when someone's talking about well-being, they're usually a utilitarian. And what they actually mean is usually one of the two standard forms of utilitarianism, which are preference utilitarianism and hedonic utilitarianism. Hedonic utilitarianism, that's where we're interested in maximizing certain kinds of brain states. Usually we talk about, like, pleasure and stuff like this, pleasure, suffering. And then preference utilitarianism is where we try to maximize preferences, kind of like Tom Jump's view.
Right.
So now, the reason that the term well-being triggers a lot of people is because it can be used as a weasel word, right? Because it's not as precise as just saying, I care about hedonic utility, where you can just straightforwardly be like, okay, well, no one's happier for this action, so there's no utility. With well-being, people kind of like to weasel in things that are often, like, deontological or virtue ethical, right? Or maybe just come from some other system. So when he says, what he's doing there, what I take him to be doing, is saying, actually, there is some sense in which that action does maximize well-being. Maybe he's even saying in all cases, but it's not but well-being here isn't equivalent to just maximizing the amount of lives. Now, obviously, I think if anything is facile, it's actually his characterization of your view on well-being as just being about life-saving. Like, I'm sure that you see obvious differences between, like, is it better to save an old person's life who's on death row or to save a child? Like, I mean, obviously, I don't think we disagree about which is the more ethical action. Both are ethical, obviously. But that's obviously, I mean, I guess you're not running a utilitarian ethic, but I don't think you have trouble seeing that well-being is going to be maximized by saving the kid, and that's because it's not just about death count, it's about the kind of experiences in the life or the amount of preference satisfaction in the life. You can see that whatever exactly we mean
potential.
By well-being, sure, but like, the point is, let's just talk about hedonic utility to make it simple. You're not going to deny an extraordinarily obvious point, like, even though either way we just save one life, in the world where we save the old person, there's less happiness than in the one where we save the young person, because the total quantity of happiness in the life of someone who's going to die tomorrow is lower than in the life of someone who's going to die, like, 90 years from now. So I think if anything's facile, it's him pretending that you think utility is just about life saving.
No, I agree, but here's the other thing, though, honestly, is he says well-being isn't a single metric of most number of people. Well, here's the thing. He actually said in his challenge, he said, well-being here is a system that's represented by maximizing the well-being of.
There's a confusion. 1 second. I think this one you might be a little confused on. So
he said, I'm sorry. He said the blue circle is a moral system in which its aim is to maximize well-being for the greatest scope of people and over the greatest time.
Yeah.
So scope of being, he said. I want to be specific, but if you're going to say for the greatest scope of being, and then in your response say, well, it's not a metric of the most number
No,
of
there's.
people.
I think you're making a little confusion there. So
Okay.
when
How?
he's when he okay, so when he's first talking, he's talking about maximizing well-being, which again I'm
Hmm.
taking to mean hedonic or preference utility, presumably. But in the later example where he's like correcting the straw man position he attributes to, the straw man he's correcting is where it's about maximizing lives saved, right? So he is saying something different there. He's saying what
Okay.
he's saying it's not about is about just saving the maximal amount of lives. He's saying it is about maximizing well-being, however exactly he defines that. So that's not a contradiction there. The first time he talks about the
Oh,
circle, yeah, he's saying it's about well-being. When he corrects the straw man of your position, he's saying it's not just about saving lives. So,
okay.
so there's
About
something he
people
cares
alive.
about with the most people, but it's not just saving the most lives. It's saving.
Sure.
Yeah, right.
So that it. So that's okay. So I see what you're saying, and I agree with you.
Okay.
So what my response to that is it's still not my argument. To die is to decrease well-being, if not only for that person, for the people around them. If one gives their life for another, it's a moral action that doesn't maximize well-being to do it. It isn't that hard to understand.
Yeah.
So you
Sorry,
get where
I'm
I'm
sorry to
coming.
keep cutting you off, but
No, go
I
ahead.
feel like just giving you like part of why I give you a syllogism or I give you the tool of like showing to him that he actually has to establish contradiction to say your example isn't valid, or like some of the reasons I pop in with these things is just because they're very useful philosophical tools for like kind of forcing someone into a corner when they're trying to be Weasley in a situation like
Oh yeah, I
this.
understand.
So
Go
one way
ahead.
you can put it is you can just say there's two possible worlds, one where person A is saved, one where person B is saved, right? And
Hmm.
well-being is identical in both those worlds. That's so straightforward. There's just that is the framing of the
Oh yeah, I
situation,
see what
right?
you're saying.
It's like
Yeah.
there's two courses, whichever you take, well-being doesn't get affected. So this action just doesn't have an impact on utility or what he's calling well-being.
No, no, I agree with. Okay, I see what you're saying, and that is a better way to put it, because you're saying, listen, whether this person dies or you don't jump on the grenade and the other person dies, it either way it doesn't change well-being. It just the action itself will maybe change. Um, it's not going to matter whether that person dies or the other person dies. It's the ethic of doing it.
Yeah,
So
it just makes it easy because when you say it doesn't maximize well-being, when people aren't thinking in a really like clear way, they'll start replying by saying, "Well, it seems like it does a lot of the time," or maybe they'll say something like, "Well, it maximizes it like for the person who's saved." So that's why just giving the possible worlds framing and just saying, "Look, there's two possible worlds and net well-being is not higher in one or the other."
right,
That's
okay,
just perfectly clear. It's
yeah,
just
I see what
it
you're saying.
doesn't matter which possible world, they're both accessible, which one we decide to access. Well-being is just the same for this action. It
Okay.
doesn't do anything to the utility.
Okay, that makes sense. So here's his next response is, yeah, factors of grief, loss, inconvenience, etc., are going to be included in the well-being algorithm, and
You can,
presumably by
yeah,
the.
but you can. I'm sorry to keep cutting in. I just want to hit all the
Yeah, go
points.
ahead. I
That so
understand.
that you can just wave away and say that's not entailed by the example. You have to show that a self-sacrificing action that doesn't have grievance consequences actually entails a contradiction, and he won't be able to do that.
Okay, yeah, I agree.
So
And he
that's the
says,
same as the first objection. You can object to that in the same way as the earlier one.
so he says those factors of grief, loss, and inconvenience and everything are going to be included on this well-being algorithm, and presumably by the person who is self-sacrificing. If there weren't downsides to sacrifice, it wouldn't be called sacrifice. You're arguing the kind of lifeboat or trolley dilemma that my video warned against, in that those are not general principles of the kind argued by the Bible. So right there, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry,
I knew you would want to jump in.
at that time I got lost actually. I'm sorry, I'm so
Oh,
pedantic. Can you
okay.
just read that again?
Okay. No, it's fine. It's fine. It may just be because I'm not using a good mic. But he says if there weren't downsides to sacrifice, it wouldn't be sacrifice. You're arguing the kind of lifeboat or trolley dilemma that my video warned against.
Wait,
It.
1 second. No. 1 second. Let's look up the word sacrifice. Sacrifice. Define. An act of slaughtering an animal or person. That's not what we're looking for. Offers, kill, a religious sacrifice. There's got to be a non like
Yeah, that's
tribe.
the religious.
Um,
Sure.
yeah, good soul sacrifice. Destruction or surrender of something for the sake of something else. Right. So
Right.
so what did he say was necessarily entailed by sacrifice there? Remind me.
Okay, let me just read it to you. It says,
Sure.
you're arguing that he says, if there weren't downsides to sacrifice, it wouldn't be sacrifice. You're arguing the kind of lifeboat or trolley dilemmas that my video warned against, in that those are not general principles of the kind argued in the Bible. And he says to argue this is to argue that there is no hypothetical maximum, even if we don't have the tools to articulate all the variables included.
Wait, sorry. I don't know why that phrasing. It's just a like a brain fart for me. Can you
It's
just
jumbled.
one more time? I don't. It might be my fault.
Yes.
Can you just one more time go through that?
No, yeah, that's fine. He says that if there weren't downsides to sacrifice, it wouldn't be sacrifice. And he says that I'm arguing a kind of lifeboat or trolley
Wait,
dilemma.
but did he use the word downside, or is that a paraphrase?
No. He says if there weren't downsides to sacrifice.
Well, wait. So the downside here is that you don't get to live. So there's a downside for you. There's an upside for the other person, but utility is the same because you both are going to have
Right.
the same amount if you live. So I don't understand. It doesn't seem like you're saying there's not a downside. You'd probably agree that there's a downside for the person who sacrificed themselves. They don't get to see their family again or whatever, or they're dead. I mean,
Right.
That's the downside. But that's not incompatible with the action not having a net effect on utility.
Yeah, that's
It's like
interesting.
saying something about giving away money and you're getting the equivalent money back or something. It's like if you talk about the total amount of money in circulation, you can be like, one guy makes a transaction and for him there's a downside, right? But it didn't affect the net amount of money in circulation.
Right. Oh yeah,
Something like that.
the amount of money that's actually in circulation. Yeah, that makes sense. But the biggest
So just to
really
be clear, would you deny, you'd agree that there's a downside for the guy who dies, clearly, right?
obviously.
So that's I
mean-
don't think that I think that he's criticizing a straw man then if you agree with that. You're not
Yeah.
saying there's no downside.
Yeah, I don't
You're
understand
just saying that
because
the downside is specific to a person and doesn't translate into a net decrease in utility. That's what, if we want to be technical about it, you're saying, right?
yes, because here's the thing: if the guy were to give his life, and in some Tom Jump world, it weren't to actually not kill him or give his life, like, what is then why would it be moral? You know what I mean? Like that's not a moral action. If you're just you jump on a grenade and there's no downside to it, you just like stand right back up and it doesn't kill the other person. Like it's not even a moral thing. Then it's just like So,
I mean,
but
like, I guess you could argue that you're having to walk over it would still maybe be, but like, yeah, okay. But
Yeah,
how does that even relate? Like, if you want to read back his criticism, that's fine. But just that one part where he tried to suggest that you're talking about sacrifice without downside. I mean, you're not, right? There is the thing that's sacrificed is your life. That's a fucking obvious downside.
Yeah,
What could
I
be a
agree with
stronger
that. So-
downside? Okay, yeah.
Right. So here's the thing that kind of that I kind of just skipped over that and just said that doesn't make any sense. So here's the kind that or the thing that made me stop.
Sorry,
is-
but I before you go on to the next one, I only replied
Yeah,
to
go
the
ahead.
part that caught my attention about his last little bit.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
Can you just one more time go over that last bit, and I'll just see if there's anything else, and then we'll move to the next thing.
Sure. He just basically says, okay, if
It's
there's
fine
no,
to just repeat it. I don't mind. I understand.
I
I
understand, I
A
will.
few times.
yeah, I'm gonna just read it. If there weren't downsides to sacrifice, it wouldn't be sacrifice. If you're arguing a kind of lifeboat or trolley dilemmas that I warned against in my videos, in that those are not general principles of the kind argued in the Bible.
Wait 1 second. So there's a few things. So the first thing was the sacrifice without downside. You're not saying that, so that's just attacking
Right.
a straw man. So the next one was lifeboat. I don't really know what he meant by that, but trolley, I know what he meant. Trolley
Yes,
problem is, for anyone who you show this to, it's just like a basic thing in philosophy. It's like a problem they use for normative ethics to show the difference between usually utilitarianism and deontology. So the idea is like, if there's one person on the track and there's 5 people on the track and a train speeding at the 5 people, would you pull the lever so you're directly causing it to
Killing
switch
one
over and
person.
kill one, but it kills
Right.
less? So the idea is like the consequentialist is going to say yes because it maximizes well-being, or the utilitarian. And the deontologist who believes in like the sanctity of life is going to say no, like that's like murdering somebody. So that's what the trolley is. Now I don't see how this is a trolley because you're not creating any kind of It doesn't like how are you creating a situation that's actually 1 second. Is there a similarity? So you're picking an instance that's good to do on deontology and that's not good on consequentialism. So it's not quite like the trolley because
No.
it's not like differential levels of utility kind of shit. But yeah, there's a surface level similarity there. So the similarity is that you're talking about an action that's good on deontology and not good on consequentialism. So we can grant there's some similarity there. And then what was the third part of the sentence?
Yeah, this last part kind of, this third part kind of, I kind of thought this doesn't make any sense because he says, in that those are not general maxims, even, no, I'm sorry, those are not general principles of the kind argued in the Bible.
What are not general principles?
Um,
Sacrificing yourself to save someone?
yes, yes, and I that's what I thought. I was like,
Yeah, now
but-
that
well,
I
let
could
me-
comment. So just to be clear, if what he's trying to say there is that self-sacrifice isn't put forward as a general like principle for action in the Bible, at that point that's a theological discussion. And I don't know about that kind of shit. So I've just been going with your interpretation of the Bible that it's a good thing. If he were to challenge whether it's actually the case that it's a good thing in the Bible, I wouldn't really have anything useful there.
That's not so. So let me lay out what I think he's saying. He's saying that okay. So he said earlier. He said, I said here is an example: one person giving their life for another person, and I said that is something moral that doesn't increase well-being, but it is biblically moral. And he says, well, no, because
did you accidentally say it doesn't maximize well-being? Because that could kind of explain a bit of why he was attacking like that. It would have. You can't always phrase things perfectly, but it would have been better to say that doesn't necessarily maximize well-being.
So that's I'm not even reading what I said. I'm just giving you a synopsis. So basically, I'm putting it in a paraphrase that's saying like, hey, here's one example, because I even put it in the video. I said, here's one example of something that doesn't necessarily maximize well-being.
Yeah, you just want to. The only reason I'm drawing attention to necessarily is because you open yourself up to attack if you don't say that. Because then you go, well, it's not always the case. You can just be like, I didn't say that. I just said it's not necessarily the case. Sorry, go ahead.
No, and that's a good distinction. Like there could be contingencies, where
you could grant that 99% of the time it maximizes well-being.
Yeah, I do, and it could be that the one person that sacrificed his life didn't have a family, and the other person did, and their family is going to be way happier. So I get all that,
Sorry, Converse. Because the thing is, it's very easy to fall into a red herring, and there's nothing worse than falling into a red herring and debating that, and then realizing it after, and then like you blew all this time. They're like, this is the kind of thing where he could easily like slightly modify the question and you might not notice it. It's like, show me something that as a general rule, if we accept it, maximizes, and then you're in some kind of other situation where you have to argue that self-sacrifice as a general rule doesn't maximize utility. But the ground has shifted a bit because your original counterexample was just any case where there's something that right. So that's why I'm just saying you want to be sensitive to the things like, it's not necessarily the case. You're not arguing that it's always the case that this doesn't maximize utility. You just want to be very precise. This is an instance that it's certainly logically possible, and it seems like most people would say it's ethical. So it's a counterexample to what you wrote specifically. And then if he says, I want to adjust it to an action that generally maximizes utility or all that, then you can say, okay, I accept you now adjusting what you're saying. I'll go think of a new counterexample. But adjusting is him conceding, effectively. If he has to adjust his question to rule out your counterexample, that means that your counterexample succeeded with respect to his initial framing. So that's a concession with respect to the initial framing.
Right, and that's kind of ad hoc to adjust like that. But I do agree with you. Like, I don't want to spend 20 or 30 minutes chasing some red herring and get away from the argument. So that is actually a good distinction.
It is ad hoc too, but I don't necessarily mind ad hoc because the thing is, look, he could have something he's getting at, and he could realize from your counterexample, fuck, I framed it wrong, but I still think I have a point. That is possible, right? So we don't want to dismiss it because he's adjusting it.
No, I agree.
I know. I'm not saying you're doing that, and I think that an easy kind of thing you can do is just see if they're being honest. You can be like, wait, but you grant that the initial framing didn't work, right? I was able to show that an example, and then you realize the contradiction. Now you're switching the framing. If they grant that, I'd probably be like, okay, that's not some crazy ego thing. They're being honest. They just think they can fix it. But I agree. If it's like 20 fucking ad hoc moves in a row or something, you're like, okay, you're like, come on.
You have to keep adjusting. See, but here's what he's doing. What I think he's doing with this, it's not a general thing. Is he's saying, yeah, but one person dying for one person is a specific example. It's not a general thing like self-sacrifice that we can apply over time. And that I just don't think is accurate because um, I think you can take a single example and apply it over time to see what happens, And um, he goes on to say, after this part, those are not general principles of the kind argued in the Bible. I think he's saying self-sacrifice is a general principle, and we can, look at self-sacrifice, and it can maximize well-being. Let's don't look at the instances,
I
And
don't
I think
know, dude. When he says those aren't, I don't know what he's referring to by those. I'm a little
I
unclear
think he
about that.
mean I think he means the specific examples I gave, like of the one person dying, because in the previous comment, um, he said, I said that self-sacrifice. I said my example wasn't self-sacrifice in general. It was a specific example that works on biblical morality,
Hmm.
but not maximizing well-being. But not,
Yeah.
I should say, necessarily
You should just
maximizing
call it
well-being.
utilitarianism. I don't know why he doesn't call his system the normal name. It's just utilitarianism. But yeah, I get what you're
That's
saying.
that's
Sure.
Okay. So that's where he comes in and says, in that those are not general principles of the kind argued in the Bible. To argue this is to argue that there is no hypothetical maxim, even if we don't have the tools to articulate all the variables involved.
Wait,
Indeed,
what?
if so keep in mind, I'm telling him this isn't generally self-sacrifice. This is a specific example. And he says, in those are not general principles of the kind of argued in the Bible.
I can't make. Sorry, it's just we might have to move to the next one because the phrasing
Okay,
there
that's
is just
fine.
too
That's fine.
vague. So like I'm getting multiple
Okay.
interpretations. Like if he's saying
Okay.
that like he could be saying that the self-sacrifice example is not argued for as a principle in the Bible, so it doesn't. Or, so
No, that's not what he's saying.
I'm
He's
just
saying,
I know I'm just giving
okay, yeah. I get what you're saying.
interpretations. So and that would turn into a theology debate. The other thing he could be saying is that sure that's argued for in the Bible, but not as like a principle or something, and then that would be him kind of changing the criteria that it's like that it can't be a one-off action. It needs to be something that as adopted as a principle would like generally not
Right.
maximize. That's a criteria change. So I don't know if he's doing a criteria change. I don't know if he's trying to get into
Well,
theology or just something totally different. But I would just say overall, I'm having a hard time processing that bit of language right there. I'm not really clear what he's saying with the like those kind of things. That's just a weird sentence to me. Maybe I'm lacking context.
well, yeah. So if you think about the previous comments that he made, he says something here. He says, you'd have to argue that self-sacrifice is generally not a well-being factor included.
No,
Including.
that's more clear. That's
So
that's
you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, but that one right there, it's clear what he's saying. That's a criteria change.
Yes.
That's him saying.
So-
That's him basically granting. Okay, you can come up with an instance that completely falsifies what I said, but it doesn't
Right.
generally do that. If we adopt it as a rule, that's fine if he wants to change the challenge, but he needs to acknowledge that he's changing the criteria and that you met his last challenge. If he does that,
Right. Because he uses the example of truth. But yeah, let's move on. He says,
Okay.
and this is kind of jumbled, but he says to argue this is to argue that there is no hypothetical maxim, even if we don't have the tools to articulate all the variables involved. Indeed, if I'm to be as pedantic as you are, I'd have to insist that Jesus's best intention would be for everyone to end their life in sacrifice.
what?
So what he's doing is he's taking my specific example and he's applying it to general things.
It's like he's saying that self-sacrifice is like the highest principle, and not counting the fact that like can everyone self-sacrifice themselves, or does that leave just one person left? Isn't there a final person who there's no sacrifice?
Right. Then they
but,
can't, right?
But even if we just frame it the right way, so everyone should sacrifice himself, you don't have to be arguing that that's like the highest principle. There could be,
I agree.
it could be like it could be that there's multiple deontological values from the Bible, and some are kind of more important than others. And sorry, there was something else in that sentence that was really weird. Can you read that again?
To argue this is to argue that there is no hypothetical maxim,
so that's
even if
that. Yeah, okay, you probed my memory. So yeah, that's I think I mean prompted. That's a really weird thing to say, because we first of all, do you understand what a hypothetical imperative is? A hypothetical maxim?
yeah, like something that hypothetically people should hold to or think is
Yeah, but do you know what we
Yeah.
mean there by hypothetically? What it means
Yeah, you
specifically?
may you
Sorry, go ahead.
not in the real world or something like that. Something that
Not
can
not
be
quite. So it's like it's a term from Kant, right? He had like the categorical imperative and the hypothetical
imperatives,
imperative.
right?
So the idea, the hypothetical imperative, it's once you have it described, you'll be like, oh fuck, we talk about this all the time. It's one of those things everyone kind of knows, but they need a word put to it. So it's just the idea of something you ought do given a goal. So if you want to drink water, you ought get a glass. If you want to hash out this philosophy, you ought ask yourself or whoever else you want to talk to about it, right? It's just saying you
It's a
ought do
conditional.
this thing if you have this goal. If you want to get good grades, you ought study. That's a hypothetical imperative. The imperative is based on hypothetically, it's the case that you have this goal. Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's like
So-
it's a conditional.
So how in any way would anything that you're saying deny like the existence of hypothetical imperatives? Like that's just such a like
I don't
unless
get
he
that.
means the word in some completely different way, I just don't understand. Like why would he think that you saying, "Hey, here's an example of an action that people would see as good or atheists would generally see as good that doesn't maximize utility." How does he get from there to you're saying that there aren't hypothetical imperatives? Like that just seems like insane. Like surely you agree that there are hypotheticals. You agree that it makes sense to say if you want to get good at basketball, you ought practice. Like you're not going to say that's like incoherent or something, are you?
Yeah, no, I'm not. And so
Okay, so
you're
that just seems
exactly
insane,
right.
yeah.
But let's just skip that because I think it's just clumsily worded, and let's go
Okay.
to the next sentence, which
Sure.
kind of lays out what he means by all of that.
Okay.
Where he says, "You are arguing your own skewed ad hoc view in order to find one gotcha that you think answers my question in some fraction of a percentage of the time. This is the best God has to offer in the realm of morality. I think my point stands for all to see, smile, and think about your well done, my good faithful servant moment, I guess."
Yeah, I don't like that. I mean, he's just condescending and trying to say your example.
Yes.
I don't like your example. Well, it's like, look, dude, it's a counterexample. Just change your wording. It's like, I'm sorry, but it seems to work. What's the problem with that? So I don't even
100%.
think he's saying anything intellectual there. I think he's just saying he's triggered, basically.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right about that. And here's the thing: is like you're arguing your own skewed ad hoc view in order to find one gotcha to think it answers my question. No, you ask for an instance of morality, something that is moral in the Bible that
Yeah.
people would generally intuitively think was moral, that wouldn't qualify as increasing or maximizing well-being. And I found that, and now you're saying nope, it's just an ad hoc example of something that meets my criteria.
Well, first of all, like, it's not like when he says it's ad hoc. That seems like a weird
can't-
use of the word ad
Usage.
hoc.
You're right. It's not ad hoc because ad hoc is if I were to now make an adjustment to that that
Well, I mean, it's just
Instant.
ad hoc. It's a look, ad hoc when
To the-
necessary or needed. I just looked it up to have the exact definition, right? It's like, and I mean, in philosophy, there's a specific definition, but it's basically the same thing. Like, here, one sec, ad hoc philosophy.
yeah, it just means like if you have to make an adjustment to
Yeah.
account for the factors.
Yeah, ad hoc hypothesis is a hypothesis added to a theory in order to save it from being falsified. Often ad hoc hypothesizing is employed to compensate for anomalies not anticipated by the theory in its unmodified form. I think that that's what he's doing.
That's what he is doing. Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, I don't really see how you're being ad hoc. Like, there's a sense if we go by like the dictionary definition of ad hoc. Like, there's a sense when you can say, well, you need a counterexample if you want to give a counterexample. So I guess it's ad hoc, kind of like it's ad hoc for me to like, go get food when I need food. So there's like, if he's trivial enough about what he means by ad hoc, then sure, you're being ad hoc, but it's going to lose all of its force as like a criticism. And if he's stringent about what he means, like you're engaged in some kind of unprincipled like modification of a theory to make it fit against some kind of criticism, like then he's going to have a hard time establishing that you're doing that. So it's like either he means something trivial by ad hoc and it won't really even amount to a criticism, or he means something stringent and he's going to have a very hard time establishing that it applies to you. The other word he used was what, twisted or something?
You're arguing your own skewed ad hoc view
Why
in
is it
order to
skewed? It's just a
That's what I'm
straightforward
wondering. It's just
counterexample.
Yeah, it's just a proposition that could be. It's just a counterexample.
And the thing is, he's the one who's being a bit ad hoc here, because he's trying to like not really admit that you gave a counterexample, but at the same time, it's like he's modifying the question to like he's talking about like a general principle or something that if done regularly would maximize well-being. Like what this guy should do, if he thinks that his challenge is still good, right, and he doesn't accept your counterexample, is he should just grant the challenge as phrased, it was met, right, and say, okay, I've accounted for my imperfect phrasing, and now I think that I've reshaped the challenge. Try it now,
Right.
Converse, right? Like that would be just good, intellectually honest behavior. Just like bitching about you finding the counterexample and trying to say it's skewed and ad hoc and not really explaining why
Well,
it's not a counterexample. That just seems like garbage to me.
Right, and here's the thing: is I had been told that he's not going to accept it when you do this response. I guarantee you, because somebody said they knew him and like told me. But I like to be charitable, and so I was like, you know what? Maybe this guy's smarter than me, and maybe he's not accepting it, and I just can't understand it. So you know what? Let me ask around. Let me get the opinion of someone. Like ask yourself. And here's the funniest part. I want to read you because you actually got brought up in my comment section, which we know who each other is. We've been involved in other debates, but you actually got brought up in the comment section, and I wanna read it to you. Somebody, Jordan Maraki, I believe is how you pronounce it. He says eating meat is perfectly moral in the Bible, as opposed to a moral system that only focuses on being, because it must extend the moral system out to animals. Is this one? Is this one more difference where people have different moral feelings? Not to mention, well-being leads to a whole lot of utilitarian problems. And then he actually brings you up, and he says, let's see. He says, let's see. He says, I'm created. The Bible says that I have more value than animals because I'm created in the image of God. This is something that a moral system based solely on well-being cannot justify. In fact, there is no reason to value my well-being over animals which die on a massive scale because of our existence. Ask yourself, has a created an argument called Name That Trait, which proves my point here. Have you heard of it?
Wait, one second. I might have misheard. Can you just read back the bit about just read that back one more time?
Yeah. So he says that it's fine. The Bible says that I have more moral value than animals because I'm created in the image of God.
Sure.
This is something that my moral system based solely on, or a moral system based solely on well-being cannot justify.
That's false. Okay, wait. So there's one problem right there. We can pick up thereafter. So
Okay.
this is just insanely stupid. Like there's people who are consequentialists and vegans. In fact, there's tons of them, or utilitarian. Like I use those words.
No, he's agreeing with you. You might have misunderstood.
Wait a second.
Okay, go ahead.
Wasn't he saying that on a non-biblical moral system, there's not a reason to give humans more value than animals?
No, he says on a moral system based solely on well-being, you cannot justify that there's more value to humans over animals.
Yes, you can. No, that's false. Okay. Yeah, no, that's what I thought I heard. I'm objecting to that. So that's false. Most vegans who are utilitarian, they don't think that animals and humans are equally valuable. That's not a view that I have, right? Like if I have to kill you or a cow, you better believe I'll be killing the cow, right? Like I care about the kind of experiences that you're having just more than the cow, right? And I think that if I'm not a pure utilitarian, but if I were, I could easily make sense of that. Like you're able to have, like we could talk about the length of your life. We could talk about the types of experiences that you're able to have. We could talk about if you're able to select a life between a cow or a human, which would you choose? It's pretty obvious that, a human life seems to have more, well, it depends what we care about, but it seems to have more utility than an animal life. And this is even easier if you go to animals that have really short lifespans, right? So there can still be grounds for veganism because you can say, like, sure, animals have less value, but it's not so much less that we can just like murder them, right?
Sure.
And so I think that it's false to say that unless you're
okay.
Like, you gotta.
So I guess.
So I object to that. Can you just read me the last part too, Converse?
Yes, that's what I was about to say. Is the last part he quotes your Name That Trait argument. He says, ask yourself, create an argument called "Name That Trait," which proves my point here.
It doesn't prove
and
this point there.
Okay, so I was gonna say, why don't you just because I've heard you use it on other people. Why don't you just lay that out that way that we can understand where he's missing the point at?
Well, okay. First, I'll explain why he's missing the point. Then I can show you the argument. So the reason he's missing the point there is that name the trait isn't it's not gonna conclude somehow that you can't have a moral system that values humans more than animals if you're not religious. Like, that's just not a conclusion of the argument, right? And if you run an argument like name the trait on someone who values humans and animals differently, they could still come out vegan, right? Maybe they just value them differently, but neither are valued sufficiently little to murder, right? So those are just a few things. So what the argument is, well, the easiest way would be I could just ask you one or two things and it'll just frame it. So, like, obviously you'd agree that it's wrong to murder humans.
Yes.
And you don't agree that it's wrong to murder animals?
Well, not... Well, I don't know. I'd have to think about it. I mean, I would say that it's not necessarily
okay wrong. But let's say that what we're doing to animals right now, like just stabbing them in the throat, raising them in captivity, stealing their young, raping the mothers so they produce children, and then stealing their children, and keeping the mothers in a cycle of rape and child theft, and taking their milk, and then killing the baby male boys for veal, putting the females back into that cycle. Just all of this. Is that ethical on your view? Is it just neutral? Is it bad?
I would have to think more about that, because instead of generalizing, I do like to look at specifics, and I think that there is maybe a spectrum, but I would say that the Bible says, like, for example, there may be times like when they sacrifice a goat, but a lot of times it's not that they want to. So I have a hard time with this, and maybe we can talk about it another time about the specifics of this, but I have a hard time equating normative ethics with a being that is not human. But what I mean by that is,
well, we don't even need to get into depth though, because you just wanted to know how the argument works, and now this is gonna take us way down that tunnel.
I can grant that. I can grant that.
I'm trying to save us that so we can stay on the main thing.
Yeah, I can grant that and say that it's not immoral to kill animals, let's say.
Right, and then the follow-up, this is kind of the name the trait part, is okay, so what is it that's true of animals that, if true of humans, would cause you to say it is okay to kill them, right? Now, people give different factors. Now, if they said that it's the trait of intelligence, which is often, given as the answer, then we'd get the result that it's okay to murder disabled people. If they said it's the trait of being human, then we'd get, which is kind of what you said there, then we get the result that if we were to take a human mind and transport it into an animal body, it would be fine to murder that animal, like your mom inside of a cow's
It's possible, yeah.
Yeah. So, and depending on how you define human, if you have a definition that includes consciousness, you have to change the situation a bit to make it work. But the idea is just, we ask about your ethical evaluation in the animal context, we ask about it in the human context, and if they're different, or sufficiently different that apparently you're supporting the Holocaust in the one case and you wouldn't if it was the human case, then we're just basically asking what accounts for that. What is the thing that's true of the animals that, were it true of the humans, would justify holocausting them in the same kind of way? So that's kind of, now it's kind of, name the trait is a dialogue process and an argument, so that's not a syllogism. There is a syllogism that's part of it, and it's kind of a nuanced thing. You have to sort of understand the dialogue flow and when the syllogism becomes relevant, but that question is sort of the core of what it's about, though.
But it doesn't show it doesn't show what he aimed to show, because it doesn't necessarily prove that.
No, I think that he's just thinking something loose, the argument seems to show that people have crazy systems unless they agree with veganism, right? And he must be assuming that the argument can kind of fuck you up unless you agree they have equal value or something, but that, I don't know why you'd think that.
Okay. Well, I that's just a side point. I thought maybe you might want to comment on it because he mentioned you.
Well, to properly explore that would turn into the whole discussion. So that's all I'll say about that.
Right. Yeah, I just wanted to just mention that in passing. But yeah, and to kind of wrap up here, I just don't think that his response to my video response was at all I think that it was ad hoc. I think it's exactly what he accused me of. I think that he's trying to make adjustments after getting a response to try and make it seem like that. And I actually said in the video that I don't know Apologia, but I said, or Apologia, I said, I don't know him. But typically when people are confronted with views that contradict their views, they cling tighter to their views. So, like, if you're wrong about something, a lot of times people won't admit it. They'll just go through and make ad hoc or just bad arguments to say, you get what I'm coming from with this, right?
Yeah, I
What do you
agree.
suggest? Because
Sure.
you actually are one of the, I guess you would consider yourself agnostic or atheist.
I'd call
And-
myself an agnostic.
Okay, so that's fair.
Although I'm
And-
an atheist with respect to certain gods, like Darth's god, I think is false. But yeah, sorry. Go ahead. You cut out. I can't hear you. Maybe you're not pushing to talk or something. You're not coming through at all. One second. Well, this is weird. Let me see if my internet's still working. Yep. Yeah. Okay. I can hear you.
Sorry, I was kicked out. I was kicked out for some reason.
That's okay.
But
All good.
I was just saying that I've seen you go on with other atheists, so I thought, like, I don't think you'll take my perspective because we don't even like, I'm a theist, you're not. So I was like, man, if I can be shown to be wrong, I want to know, but I don't see anything of substance there.
No, the only thing that I heard you say that I think was wrong was when you thought he was contradicting himself when he said that there's some that, you know, it's not about saving the most lives, but then earlier he said it's about maximizing utility for the most people. I don't think that's a contradiction, but everything else, I think you're making sense overall. I think that he is, for what I can tell from what I've been presented here, maybe the bigger context will show him wrong or something, but from what I've seen here, it does look like he is kind of ad hoc modifying his question. Because the thing is, what a really, like, intellectually honest person would do would just say, you've given a counterexample, okay, fine, my framing wasn't perfect, let me try to reframe. Right, but he's not really doing that. He's kind of saying, like, oh, your example is twisted and this and that. And he didn't use twist, he skewed, whatever the fuck. Your example is skewed and ad hoc. And you know, find one that if adopted as a principle would tend to maximize. So that's more like he's changing the criteria, just talking shit about your example and not granting that it actually broke the first criteria. So that does seem kind of like ad hoc sort of garbage. So
Yeah.
I think that if I had to sum up, and then you can kind of say what you want to sum up.
Sure.
I would just say I agree that there's some ad hoc going on, but I don't even think that's like, I don't care that much about the psychological analysis. I care just more about the truth, but I would agree with you based on what I've seen. With respect to the actual disagreement, if his challenge is to find, and if he's asking to find something that falls in the biblical half, not in the overlap section, not in the well-being maximization section, that most atheists would agree with, I think that you can give a counter-argument, kind of like this syllogism we wrote up: if sacrificing oneself in order to save another without maximizing well-being is seen as ethical by most atheists, then there's an action from the biblical morality circle that most atheists would find ethical. Just modus ponens on that implication. So I think that counterexample works. I think that the replies, which I can't remember them all, but the replies did not sound very good. So if you reply by saying, oh, that's not something that, like, if adopted as a principle would tend to maximize well-being, that's him adjusting his criteria. So it's fine if he wants to give you a new challenge, but he should grant that your response broke the first criteria if he's going to do that. Responding by saying that it's actually impossible that there is a case where sacrificing oneself doesn't maximize well-being, that seems like an assertion. If he wanted to prove that, he'd have to show not just that it's likely to maximize well-being or something like this, he'd actually have to show that it's logically impossible, that is, to derive a contradiction from the propositions A is saving B's life and well-being isn't maximized by A saving B's life. And there was one or two others, but I don't remember all of them. So that's my overall take.
Okay. Well, man, I appreciate you, coming on and talking with me. And,
Sure.
I guess what the last thing I'd like to say is that I've got a critique of him, and I want to put it in a way that will answer one of his objections as well. Christ said something kind of general where he said, like, build your your home on a sturdy foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good general principle. But then you have to look at specifics. So, for example, the way he worded it was not a good foundation because I found an example that didn't work. And so, even though there is a general principle in normative ethics, you have to look at specific examples in order to judge whether something is desirable or not desirable.
Yeah.
And so, but I would just say that I think the reason why he's clinging to that this isn't a good answer is because, there's an old example where I used to work construction, so I used to use this all the time, and that's why I was away from YouTube for a while. If you're there with a block mason and he's stacking bricks, and you tell him, "Hey, your second row of blocks are crooked," he's going to say, "Thanks, man." But if he's 50 rows up, and you say, "Hey, your second row's crooked," he's going to say,
Yeah.
"Gee, thanks, jerk." Like he's not going to appreciate it. Like your starting point's messed up. So here's the last thing I'll say is, I just don't think that he wants to be caught in this. I think it's wrong to put out a challenge like this and then try to, try to do everything you can to not accept a legitimate answer for it. And I think that it may be because he don't want to make atheists think that this isn't a coherent position. But I think you'll agree with me that, like, when I hear a Christian give a position and I see there's, something wrong with it, even though I might not want to ruffle feathers, I still can't adopt that position just from a intellectually honest,
Sure.
position.
Yeah, and I mean, like, what he's doing overall is, like, it's just, he's saying, like, show me something that's not utilitarian in the Bible that people will agree. It's like, man, people have tons of intuitions about morality and feelings about morality that aren't utilitarian. Like, if you can find anything in the Bible that's not utilitarian, like, I mean, there's a good chance some people, you just create an instance of it that doesn't maximize utility and people think it's decent. Like, it's a kind of easy challenge to meet, probably.
Yeah.
I think that you're talking a bit about the psychology, so I guess I'll say one thing about that. Again, I don't know the guy, I don't know the full context, so take it all with a grain of salt. And if he at some point listens to this, nothing personal, like, everyone can.
Yeah, maybe he'll come on and have a conversation with us.
He's more than welcome to. I disagree with what I've seen of his position here, but he's welcome to come talk. But I think that, kind of like your analogy with the brick building, like, when you spend a lot of time in, like, philosophy spaces or spaces that are interested in things like formal logic and stuff like this, you kind of get a different mentality where it's like you want to be saying the correct thing, and if someone says that what you're saying is incorrect, it's like, just fucking save the pain now. just like, take the correction, don't try to go any further. Like, generally speaking, the kind of people who I see in those spaces who really care about these kind of things, philosophy, logic, etc., are happy for corrections, because, like, when you debate a lot, when you engage with philosophy a lot, you learn that, like, my mind is honestly so imperfect and so far from being like some super AI or some shit. It's so easy for even a really smart person to just phrase things imperfectly, right? Maybe the core idea makes sense or something, but it's just so easy to make little mistakes that make something you say false, that, like, you need to get in the habit of just, like, if there's a correction, just take it, and if you don't think it really affects your view, just take it in a way that kind of diffuses it. Go, okay, like, yeah, I grant that, okay, my framing wasn't perfect. I still think I can salvage what I'm saying here, though. What about this challenge, right? So I just think that the way he's operating is kind of indicative of, like, someone who hasn't spent a lot of time in philosophy spaces, but just kind of, like, has an interest in maybe, like, arguments or debates or those kind of topics, and has kind of maybe, like I don't want to say, like, built an ego around it or something, but, like, maybe he's kind of still operating in his own little world a bit. He hasn't really interfaced with the larger sphere of, like, philosophy people or something, and he's not really, like, adjusted into that habit of, like, when you get corrected on some small little technical thing, like, just, you don't fight it. It's a positive thing. It helps you make your position better.
Sure. Well, I agree with you, and I'll just say this to end, is that there's an old saying that says exactly what you just said, and it's pay your dues up front, because if you don't, you'll pay double later. Like you know, pay your dues up front so that you don't have to, it don't all pile up and then you got to pay it at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And so, appreciate you talking with me, and I do want to have other conversations with you so that I can kind of pay my dues up front about some of my beliefs, like divine, divine command theory. But
Sure.
I'll just talk to you about maybe setting that up off stream here.
Sounds good to me.
All
I'll
right.
upload this to a Drive folder and I'll send it to you. I guess your preferred platform is Twitter, or do you want me to just link it on Discord?
Or send it to my email. It doesn't matter.
Sure. Okay. I'll send that to you after. Good talking to you.
All right. Thanks so much, man.
Okay. Peace.